Welcome to our first 2026 Mex Moves, the weekly podcast where Damian Fraser and I, Eduardo Garcia, break down the topics and headlines shaping Mexico's business and financial world. This week we have a very interesting conversation with Michael Fung, an accomplished leader and international expert in human capital, education, and skill developments, which in this age of AI are topics of great relevance. For our weekly wrap-up, we will discuss the new ownership reconfiguration of Televisa, Mexico's most important and largest television company. We'll also talk a little bit about the economic forecast, what we can expect for the Mexican economy in this new year. And finally, the merger of Volaris and VivaAerobus, which happened or was announced while Damian and I were away. So, Damian, how are you and how is your year looking?
Very well, Eduardo. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Interesting year. We've got off to, I think quite a lot of transactions. You mentioned the Televisa one. At the end of the year, we have the Volaris Vivo transaction, and obviously everyone is trying to kind of work out what kind of year 2026 will be. Why don't we start with that, Eduardo? What's your take on what the year's going to be like?
Well, we closed 2025 in no spectacular form, and it doesn't look like it will change much. The growth predictions are slightly better than what we had this year, the last year. The economy probably grew 0.4% or maybe a little bit less. We don't know. There were some good numbers in the October month, but we'll still have to wait for a few more data. Inflation, it's looking a little bit more promising in terms of coming down. It ended up at 3.69% in 2025 as of today's release of the inflation figures the INEGI put out this morning. And the key questions will be, how will Mexico revamp or restart or reconfigure the interest of investors in the economy? I think that's one of the big challenges that the administration is facing, in addition to obviously the renegotiation of the USMCA, which is going to be a tough couple of months ahead of us, as we don't know what Trump really intends to do, if he wants to really renegotiate, reestablish that free trade agreements with a few changes that he might like to, or whether he's really just gonna keep the uncertainty regarding the agreement for future years, which plays a little bit better for him than for Mexico, in the sense that not having a clear framework makes investment in Mexico a little bit more risky, if I say so. We obviously started the year with a bang in geopolitics and economic terms with the capture of Maduro in Venezuela, and now the U.S. Saying that it'll run that country and will be taking some of the oil. That for the energy industry in Mexico might mean that the interest might shift towards the country with the largest oil reserves in the world, which is Venezuela, rather than to Mexico. At the end of the year, there were a few signs up of potential investment in oil fields in Mexico. The government announced that companies were interested. I hope that materializes for the good of the country. But I don't think it'll be enough on the energy sector as well, on the electricity sector. The government has to make sure that it could attract people to invest in the country, so the Plan Mexico comes to fruition after a year that really nothing happened. So I think in economic terms, the outlook does not change much, and we will have to see whether the government dedicates more resources or not to Pemex. Maybe this year is not that crucial. It will be next year when we will know more if the government has to continue bailing out that company that it's draining resources from Mexico's coffers for not good reason, because the company is still losing a lot of money. So a lot of uncertainty still ahead, and the government will have to bring the ship to port in a more orderly fashion. I say the reforms that they did last year were not that inspiring, but we'll have to wait and see if Claudia Sheinbaum decides to pull back a little bit on its control of everything and be a little bit more friendly towards the markets. What's your take?
Yeah, I'm a bit more positive than you. I think, even though I obviously accept there's lots of uncertainty, I think that USMCA in one form or another will get renewed, confirmed, and that will reduce uncertainty and help investment. Secondly, it was very encouraging that Mexican exports in general, but especially non-car related exports, grew very strongly to the US last year, so that Mexico clearly benefited from the increase in tariffs to Europe and Asia, and to a much lesser extent, the increase in tariffs in Mexico, which meant the tariff differential between Mexico and the US became more favorable. And with double-digit increase in exports, ex cars, it's logical to think that investment would have to follow, as presumably most of these manufacturers are now operating at much higher capacity utilization rates. And politically, affordability is a key issue for Trump, which is why he's backtracked on a few tariffs in the last few months. And going into the midterm elections, where the Republicans will be sort of struggling to keep control of the House, I think it's more likely than not that he will want to have some kind of deal with Mexico. And the capture of Maduro has different ramifications, but it does sort of show that he wants to keep Latin America, Mexico, therefore, close to the US, and having a free trade treaty, might be able to achieve that. I don't think trade uncertainty goes away, because we have a USMCA today, and Trump puts tariffs and takes tariffs off, so I'm sure he's going to continue to do that, but it might help mitigate some of the uncertainty. I think secondly, interest rates, which have been extremely high in Mexico really until the last few months, now at 7%, but they were over 10% beginning of last year. I think they're probably going to continue to come down. Mexico, of the main economies in the world, had the highest real interest rates, and I think it might come down to as low as 6%, and that should help credit. And then last year we had a big fiscal adjustment in Mexico, because basically AMLO handed over a deficit of 6% of GDP, and Claudia brought this down to a little bit over 4%. It was a pretty significant adjustment, and this year we're going to sort of stick at 4%, might even go up a bit. So there isn't going to be a sort of negative fiscal impact on GDP growth. So I think we could see growth, nearer 2% this year, but I think overall investment might start to pick up to the factors that I mentioned. I also think that there's something important going on in the financial sector, which is going to help Mexico finally. Mexico's banks are extremely profitable, as we all know. The big banks, at least 25% ROEs and so on. And a big part of that is that they offer very low deposit rates compared to the overnight interest rate. So probably the average interest rate, if you have a deposit with BBVA or Banorte, Santander, so 2 or 3%. Certes have been 7 to 10% over the last year. Now, with the fintechs coming in, getting banking licenses, so Revolut has a banking license. Obviously, Nu has just got its, and other banks, other fintechs are looking for their licenses, like Story and Klar. I think you're finally going to see some pressure, and in order for them to sustain these ROEs, they're going to have to, lend more. And that's going to be easy to do with interest rates down. So the driver of profitability, which has been a subsidy on deposits to the banks, low deposit rates, is going to get eroded, and you'll see credit start to improve. And the fintechs themselves, of course, are also lending more. So I think that overall there is an argument to say that things will get better, however uncertain the world is. And of course, the US economy is performing a bit better than people thought, and that just itself helps Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the foreign export-import sector in Mexico did much better than anyone anticipated. It was, I think the Wall Street Journal did a story that it was the winner of the Liberation Day in a certain way. And that has obviously probably turned some eyes towards Mexico. And like you said, if they're at full capacity, they'll need to upgrade their places here. And the benefit of Trump having the Western Hemisphere as his backyard might do good for the economic side of the equation. Sometimes it's hard to read what his intentions are. Well, not hard to read. Their intentions are economical, transactional, not political. And I think we'll be safe on that end. I mean, people are worried, but we don't have oil reserves as large as Venezuela does. So I think we'll be safe, and there will be some agreement, I hope, with him.
That's right. I mean, Venezuela, impact on Pemex. I mean, some people saying it's negative because, as you said, more investment will go into Venezuela. Venezuela also produces heavy crude like Mexico does. Maybe if there's a lot of heavy crude out there, the discount on heavy crude will widen. I'm sure that's all true up to a point. It may be the case that it's a sort of catalyst for Mexico to get its act together on energy and push through deeper reforms when they see that so much money is flooding into Venezuela and so much heavy crude is being exported. It's sort of sometimes you need a crisis to make the changes necessary.
To wake up, we hope so. Now
we move on to Viva and Volaris.
Yeah, let me start, Damian, just to recap a little bit. At the end of last year, we were all surprised to find out that these two low-budget airlines had reached a merger agreement to consolidate in one company operated with the two brands, if I recall correctly, how the transaction was structured. It's obviously still needs to be reviewed by Mexico's anti-competitive agency. It'll bring back Mexico to a duopoly structure like many other industries are here. I think it does make sense for the way the world of airlines is growing and the penetration that these two airlines have had in certain markets. And now with them joining forces, they might even be a bigger power player in the aviation industry, especially with the U.S.-Mexico connections and travel and business flights. For them, I think the USMCA will be very important. And if that happens, that the migration element that Trump has cracked down on eases up, I think will also help both airlines as they have targeted migrants flowing in and out of Mexico and to the United States. Do you have any more insights, Damian?
Yeah, I think a few. I mean, one, without any question, Viva and Volaris have done a great job over the last 20 years, 15 years, growing airline traffic in Mexico through the low cost fares. So airline traffic has been growing at 20% a year over the last decade. Far higher than GDP, and airlines have helped bring communities together, take people from one place to another in a much more efficient manner than taking a bus, and often much cheaper now than taking a bus. So I think it's a testament to the success of the low cost model, which is not just Mexico. It's obviously something that we've seen all over the world, but in Mexico has been applied by these two airlines. I think that secondly, it raises massive antitrust concerns because on domestic flights, if you combine the two, you get to a 70% market share. Mexico already has a competition problem in telcos, in food and beverage, in soft drinks, in beer and so on. So this would be another, as you said, example of that. And this fierce competition between Volaris and Viva and to some extent Aeromexico has benefited the Mexican consumer. And although they say they're going to be two brands and separate management teams, at the end of the day, if you have one shareholder, you're going to have one corporate strategy. And history has told us that when you have one company with 70% market share, you have pricing power, and it's not good for customers. Thirdly, I was very surprised. Well, not very surprised. I was a bit surprised that right after the announcement, Shane Baum came out in the Mañanera and said it was a great thing. Because this is a big test of the new competition authority in Mexico. Correct. After the previous competition and independent competition authority was disbanded. Now it's part of the Secretary of Economy, so it's not formally independent. So she clearly sent a message, an important message, to the new authorities that she wants this to happen, which presumably means it probably will happen. But I was surprised, or a little bit surprised, that she was so forthright, so fast, and hadn't appeared to have taken on board the competition concerns with this 70% market share. Fourth, looking at the numbers, it's going to be a 50-50 split between Volaris and Viva of the equity. Volaris has many more planes than Viva does. It's got 155 versus Viva's 83. Volaris has a bigger share of the enterprise value. It's got more debt. But even so, Volaris has been around longer than Viva, which came after. It was used to be twice as big. So going through all the numbers, it's clear that Viva has done a much, much better job at Volaris at running an airline. And it's no surprise, therefore, that Roberto Alcantara, the chairman of Viva, is going to be the chairman of the combined entity. And my guess, it's obviously only a guess at this point, that that Viva is going to effectively be running this. This is just to maintain people's ego while the merger happens. But Viva, which has been much more successful extracting profits out of the planes it has flying, than Volaris, seems to have chosen its routes better, has less debt. It's going to be in the driving seat or the aircraft seat. Viva, in the call they had after the announcement, they talked about some synergies, and Viva, excluding fuel, has costs of 5.1 cents a mile flown versus 5.5 cents for Volaris. So it's much more efficient at that, just from a cost operation. So I think that this is a validation of Viva's strategy versus Volaris, and they're going to be taking 50% of the equity. They will be quite happy, not only because they're getting 50% of the equity, having been a much smaller airline originally, but also because they will now have equity in a publicly listed, New York listed entity, so they no longer have to do an IPO. They have liquid shares. They can more easily borrow against somebody, can sell them in the future. So this removes the need, if it's approved, for an IPO. Now, it could be that the competition authority says, we'll agree to this, but you have to give up some slots. To Aeromexico, you have to give up some slots on the international side. To the American airlines, to United, which have been pushing for more slots, and the Department of Transport in the US put some pressure on Mexico to give up slots, and they banned new flights from AIFA and some flights from Benito Juarez as part of that fight, which you probably remember last year. So maybe they'll sort of carve up some slots in return for getting this deal through, which will keep United happy, keep American Airlines happy, keep Delta happy, which is obviously aligned with Aeromexico. So all the airlines kind of win from this, but I am concerned that it does lead to very strong concentration of market power in one team's hands. But Alcantara's very wily political operator. There are other important shareholders at the Volaris level, and they'll be pushing for this, and they seem to have already got Jane Bone's ear. Maybe it was so soon after the announcement, maybe she hadn't thought it through properly. And maybe, as it gets analyzed, we'll see some more questions asked about whether this is really good for the Mexican consumer.
Yeah, it was very surprising that she gave it a thumbs up right after the fact. The news was just even being analyzed, and she was happy to have talked to them and been part of the announcement in some sort of way. And I think in the end, the consumers will lose. It'll be a test, and we will get a good sense of what we were all afraid about, putting the Competition Commission inside the Economy Ministry, was going to mean. And if it gets approved, even with the slots and things like that, maybe we have a better idea that these very large transactions are approved or not in other places, not the Competition Commission, unfortunately, in my view.
So moving on to Televisa, why don't I just do a quick recap on the different news? So Emilio Escarga, who has a controlling voting stake in Televisa, sold some shares, about 8% of Televisa, 7.7% of Televisa, to the two co-CEOs of Televisa, Bernardo Gomez and Alfonso Engoitia. I think the total transaction was about $100 million or so. And this basically, although Emilio Escarga will continue to control the control trust that controls Televisa, Escarga's ownership, will go down, his economic ownership, to about 18%, to 12%. And Bernardo Gomez and Alfonso Engoitia will go up to about 5%. At the same time, presumably with that money, Escarga announced that he was taking another 17% stake in Olemane, or Aguilas, which is the company that used to be part of Televisa that was spun off, that owns the Americas football team, the Estadio Azteca, now called Estadio Banorte, also owns the gaming business and the editorial, the publishing business. So he now owns about 38% of Olemane. So that's quite. And then a little bit before these two transactions, Olemane, or Aguilas, announced that it was getting an investment with an enterprise value of $450 million. So let's say a $220 million investment or something along those lines by General Atlantic to take a 49% stake in a division of Aguilas, the division that owns the Americas football team and this football stadium and real estate around the football. That transaction does not include the gaming and the editorial side. There's quite a significant reshuffle here. And my take on it, Eduardo, is Escarga's clearly more interested in Olemane and the football business, and so he's building up his stake there. So he's getting more aligned with where he spends his day. He had to step down from the board of Televisa due to these FIFA corruption allegations. And meanwhile, Bernardo Gomez and Alfonso de Engoitia, basically, as I understand it, run Televisa day to day. They're co-CEOs, and they're also board members. And now they're getting, putting their money where their mouth is by getting a much bigger stake. So you always had a slight conflict with two people running the company not having significant economic exposure to that company. Now they do, and so presumably they're going to be kind of more aligned than historically with shareholders in Televisa. Thirdly, we've got this sort of upcoming transaction, which has been rumored for some time in the Mexican newspapers, of Grupo Televisa buying AT&T Mexico, and then merging it with Izzi, basically with their broadband and their cable business, and therefore being in a position to compete head-to-head with American Mobile in Mexico. I think if that happens, it's possible that Televisa will want to raise more capital, do a primary share offering or something of that nature to help finance that. Not just the purchase, which wouldn't change the debt ratios too much because AT&T is cash flow positive, but they probably need some investment to be more competitive. And so it's possible that eventually you may see a kind of a spin-off of Televisa Univision that gets spun off to shareholders of Grupo Televisa and its own shareholders, because Televisa owns 45% or so of Televisa Univision, and then Televisa would just become Izzi, which would then own what was AT&T Mexico, and maybe AT&T Mexico would be a shareholder. So then you would have the television business, the cable business, and the football business, and they'd all be separated. Somewhat speculative, all of that, but I think from my perspective, it looks like we're heading in that direction, and it may well be that that there's new capital to be raised. The Izzi level, if they do acquire AT&T Mexico, if that rumor is confirmed, and maybe even at the Televisa Univision level, because that's quite a leveraged company and it faces quite sharp competition from the streamers and so on. And some people are even talking about Televisa Univision being a takeover candidate itself because it's sort of too small, along with the sort of the Paramount Netflix battle for Warner. People are saying, well, whoever doesn't get Warner might look at Televisa Univision as a second option, much smaller, of course.
Yeah, that's. I think you, even though it's speculative, and you are on track. At least that's what it looks like. I mean, it does seem like Escara himself. His passion is with the football team, and it's always been, and the gambling, obviously, and publishing. I was surprised to see him sell that portion, although he still controls the company. We have another player there that it's David Martinez, no? He still has a stake in Televisa. I wonder what he's looking forward, or how does he view this transaction? Maybe he likes it too, as he gets along with Bernardo and Alfonso, from what we know. But yeah, it's a reconfiguration of a very old company that was almighty, all-powerful, and the things that have changed in the industry have probably pushed this configuration more than anything else, with streaming and all these other new ways of entertainment that people have at their disposal on their phones at any moment. So it is going to be interesting to see if these three different groups emerge, as you say, how they will fare out in a competitive environment.
Great. Well, I think we could probably leave it at that. Eduardo, unless you have anything else?
No, I think we should move to the interview, and we'll be back next week. It's an honor to have today in Mex Moves Michael Fung, who is an international expert in human capital, education, and skills development, as well as a top advisor for large organizations. Michael, thanks for taking the time for this conversation. You are currently the Executive Director of the Institute for the Future of Education at the Tecnológico de Monterrey, Mexico's largest private university with 26 campuses and 18 offices globally, where you share your deep multicultural understandings as well as your global perspectives on several issues, from having lived and worked in Singapore, Hong Kong, China, the US, and now Mexico. From that global vantage point, Michael, and in terms of human capital, what big shifts do you see in how countries are preparing people for the future of work, and where does Mexico stand in all this?
Well, thank you very much, Eduardo, for the introduction and for the excellent question. I think as we think about the future of work, clearly it is being disrupted by a number of key forces, one of which is advancement in technology, but also shifts in global supply chains, changes in population demographics, and extended lifespans of our populations. So as we think about the impact of these various disruptions, we are really starting to see what I'll call a skills crisis, where our populations, our workforce, is facing an increasing skills gap between the skills that they have and what industries require. And in some ways, the skills that's required for day-to-day living as well. And coupled with that is the fact that educational systems are fairly traditional in nature and are not sufficiently agile and responsive to these changes. And this is a challenge that we're seeing globally. So it's a common challenge, whether it's here in Mexico, in Singapore, or in Europe, or other parts of the world. So we have to really think about how do we address these disruptions going forward as we think about the future of work. And I'll suggest that there are a number of key things to think about. There are a couple of new paradigms, a few new paradigms for educational systems that we need to think about. One is to move from narrow academic pathways to a system of education that offers multiple pathways to a diverse range of learners, and to move from a front-loaded education model to one that is much more lifelong learning in nature, so that learners and individuals have the opportunity to continue to learn throughout their lives and pick up new skills. A third paradigm shift is around moving from a from a classroom-based instructional model to one that incorporates work-based learning, so that our learners, our students, our graduates have relevant skills for the industry when they complete the programs. A fourth paradigm shift is around moving from emphasis on technical skills to increasing our attention on transversal skills, or critical core skills, as I like to call it. And to move from a public sector provision model of education and lifelong learning to one that provides both public and private complementarities in establishing such a system. So I have previously worked in Singapore leading the Skills Future movement, where we built a comprehensive skills development ecosystem across the population, across different industrial sectors. We've also seen efforts in various countries, such as in France and Canada, where there has been an introduction of a lifelong learning entitlements, and also fairly extensive efforts within countries such as Ireland, Australia, and South Korea to address the growing skills gap that is facing in those economies. In the context of Mexico, I think there is growing recognition and support by government, both at the federal and state level, of the importance of addressing the skills gap as I've described it. I've seen some action by industry clusters. For example, the automotive cluster, clearly being impacted by electrification of vehicles, have been looking at how to bridge the skills gaps. Some educational institutions, such as Tecnológico de Monterrey, is working on various initiatives to address some of these skills gaps through continuing education, through micro-credentials, through online education, and so on. I note in particular there are quite a number of startups in Mexico and in Latin America trying to provide solutions to these skills needs of the industry. While we're seeing specific efforts by various actors, we have yet to have a systematic approach in Mexico, in Latin America, and I think we need to convene various stakeholders in the ecosystem so that we are able to find systems-level solution as we think about the future of work, future of skills.
Quite interesting and quite different from my time as a student many, many years ago, which it was much more rigid than what you're describing that is needed today. Is your impression that universities in Mexico are moving in that flexibility element that you mentioned to provide all this framework that you describe?
Well, some of the universities are more progressive in their approaches. They have seen the gap and the needs and are starting to move and transform in that direction. However, I'll say that there are many universities that have yet to realize that possibilities because of existing models of education, but in certain contexts, also the barriers and the constraints due to regulations. So I think there is still a lot to be done in the overall space, especially for universities, to embrace new models of education and the new paradigms they have described.
That's right. I hadn't thought about it, but the regulatory framework might not be very conducive to be more flexible in the way you teach because of the requirements officials ask universities. But moving forward, at the Institute for the Future of Education, I've seen you talk about building fair education, meaning fit of purpose, adaptive, inclusive, relevant, which goes back to your first answer. What does that look like on the ground in Mexico? How close are our universities, or at least the tech, to achieve it?
So let me spend a couple of moments describing the FAIR model that we have envisioned as we think about the future education. And it forms a nice little acronym. And we like to think that the future education needs to be fair. So the first pillar is around being fit for purpose. And this involves thinking about how do we design pedagogical, neurocognitive, and technological approaches that lead to effective learning. At the Tech, we have introduced the Tech 21 education model that is competency-based and challenge-based. And this is going to help us to be a lot more responsive to the changing needs of industry because the competency-based education model is linked closely to the needs of industry for various jobs and various job tasks. The challenge-based model allows our students to acquire industry-relevant experience as they go through the course of learning, working on real-world problems and getting feedback from industry as they present the solutions to them. Also at the Tech, we have a faculty experimentation program that supports faculty across all our disciplines to experiment with the use of technology and different pedagogical approaches, and to measure the impact of these different interventions to understand and scale solutions that are successful in promoting and improving learning outcomes. Well, the second pillar that we're focused on is creating adaptive, flexible, and convenient learning modes and pathways. And again, in the Tech 21 model, we've created a good amount of flexibility to allow our students to choose majors and minors according to the interests and to progress in different pathways to achieve specializations in different areas. We've also introduced a suite of micro-credentials, including more than 200 massively open online courseware courses that learners can take, including our students, and again, to create these convenient ways for different learners from different backgrounds to acquire new skills and competencies. In the third pillar on being inclusive, we are working on various ways to bring quality education opportunities to all, in particular to underserved communities in Mexico, in the region, and to other parts of the world. And the challenge there is, how do we achieve scale in an affordable manner while maintaining a good degree of quality in the offerings that we are providing to these segments of the population. One project that I'm particularly proud of is a project we call El Camino, where we have established and built a sophisticated AI back-end system that then delivers learning to youths from poor communities in Mexico through the use of very low-tech 2G, 3G cell phones, through WhatsApp, through conversations and interactions using messaging services. Through our Tech Prize program, we are also supporting many startups across Latin America that helps to address the inclusion issue across various communities in Latin America. And the final pillar around being responsive involves anticipating and responding to the dynamic changing needs of our industries and societies. And there we have a extensive project that we call Shaping Skills, where we are building skills taxonomy, skills mapping to the jobs that are important to various industry sectors, and forecasting where the skills landscape is moving. That would then inform curriculum design at the universities, that will inform continuing education opportunities that's being offered by various institutions to bridge and close that skills gap. We're also supporting other universities to accomplish this, not just at Tech, but other universities in the region and in the world, because we recognize that in order to solve the skills crisis that we're facing, we need to mobilize a much wider set of institutions and ecosystems to make that happen. One of the things that we launched earlier this year was to form a education network focused on generative AI to understand the impact of artificial intelligence on teaching and learning. And now we have close to 50 universities across Latin America, across Mexico, that's working with us on the range of experiments to understand how to incorporate artificial intelligence in their teaching and learning models. We've also contributed towards designing new institutions in the region, such as one in El Salvador last year, an institute that focuses on engineering and science education, and helping to elevate capabilities of universities across the region, such as digital learning capabilities in Peru a couple of years ago. So we believe that we have to work together in the collective to help to address these very important issues and challenges that we face as we go forward.
Fascinating, Michael. When I was beginning my career, I always thought that to make a decision at such a young age on what you ought to be for the rest of your life was too much. And I'm glad to hear that there is now a shift towards minor and major possibilities for students, as well as to give them skills and certificates for different types of needed skills for specific industries or for the specific need of the person that is learning and wanting to acquire knowledge for the future. You touch upon AI a little bit. AI dominates every conversation now in business and education. In your view, what are the real opportunities for Mexico, and what are the biggest misconceptions when it comes to AI in learning and in teaching?
That's an excellent question that I think we need to address. And I think that the challenge that we face is how do we many people are grappling with. What's the role of AI? What is real and what's not real? So let me just start by talking a little bit about the hype around AI. Clearly, it's a buzzword. Every conference is focused on that practically. So the hype is that AI would surpass human intelligence, that AI would replace humans, in particular human teachers, that AI would solve any problem that you throw at it, and that AI would become the great equalizer for everyone. And as we've seen with past cycles of technology development, there's always a tendency to overshoot in the initial period. And I believe that artificial intelligence is going through that phase right now. If you think back 10, 12 years or so, when the massive open online courseware, we call them MOOCs, when it first appeared, there were predictions that would be the death of universities. It's a decade later, universities are still here, we're being challenged, but clearly we're not dead yet. So the same is being said about artificial intelligence. It's going to change everything. And anyone that does not embrace artificial intelligence is going to go the same way as dinosaurs. Now, don't get me wrong. Artificial intelligence is important. It's going to change many things. It's going to help us improve in our capabilities for many things. But the hype that's surrounding AI right now poses the danger of us forgetting the fundamentals. So I'll make 2 points that, the concept of artificial general intelligence, where AI really acquires real intelligence, I believe is still we're still very far away from that. What we're seeing in artificial intelligence right now is the ability to do many tasks very well. It's able to mimic real conversations and real life conversations. But the concept of artificial general intelligence is still elusive. So my view is that we need to position AI to augment and think about how best it would augment human capabilities, and not to start thinking about how would they replace humans completely, at least not in the near term or the short term. The promise of AI revolves around the ability to scale, to augment capabilities, as I mentioned, and to make our present tasks much more efficient. So I think many of us have had the experience of using large language models, putting in a few prompts, and we were amazed at how quickly we could receive some results that look pretty sound. But again, as I mentioned, that's not real intelligence. That's processing large data and patterns and producing something that seems to mimic human intelligence. So the promise of AI, I think at the moment, what we can realize would be the ability to offer better modes of personalized learning, the ability to automate particular tasks, especially repetitive tasks, such as administration, the ability to provide real-time support for learning, for our work, and to receive real-time feedback for our work and our learning, and to increase the access and equity for access to sophisticated knowledge and information to a much wider segments of our population. What is truly important is that we must not forget the pedagogical principles when we think about use of AI in education, in teaching and learning. What remains to be very, very important is learner agency and motivation. So how motivated is an individual to pursue learning? How much self-agency, self-directed learning are they able to undertake? And the role of formative feedback in the learning process. These principles remain highly relevant in the educational landscape. So it's not just about throwing AI at the learning problem. It's thinking about how do you use AI with all these pedagogical principles wrapped in there. The other dimension I want to talk about is the importance of transversal skills. Some people call it soft skills, power skills, critical core skills. That's still extremely important as we think about the formation process for learners and students. The ability to think critically, to problem solve, to communicate effectively across cultures, to be able to work in teams. These skills are still extremely important. And I think these are the skills that can be well delivered through existing channels of learning, whether it's in universities or other institutions, where there's the opportunity for learners and students to work together in groups, to be addressing particular problems and so on, rather than studying or learning in the isolation in the homes using a computer. What we need is more research in these areas of AI-enabled learning to measure the impact of these interventions to truly understand what will bring about the most effective learning outcomes. We did a pilot last year on using technology for adaptive learning. We did that experiment at Tech involving 3,000 students and around 80 professors. And we had a number of experimental conditions. And we found that the best condition that enabled students to have significant learning gains was the condition where there is both human intervention and the use of technology and artificial intelligence for the adaptive learning pathways. And this year, we're going to extend the experiment to 12,000 students. We're scaling it up, again, to better understand what is going on and find the best approach that we will scale to bring about the power of AI in education and learning. So if I would just quickly summarize the reality of AI in education is that it's going to augment and not replace humans, at least not in the near term. And we need to adopt an evidence-based approach in how we design, how we pilot, how we implement these solutions, and have an expectation that we will make incremental progress and will need sustained effort over time to fully realize the power of technology and artificial intelligence in education, and in that process to address governance and ethical considerations around the use of technology. And also, very importantly, within our organizations, how do we balance our resourcing? How do we manage this change that involves our teachers, our administrators, our students, the entire organization? So there are many, many dimensions to think about as we look at the promise and the myth of AI in education.
I'm glad you said that you're still there, that the university is not dead because of AI. The media world has faced many of these challenges through its life. The radio was going to kill print media, television was going to kill radio, and none of that has happened. I mean, they've changed, they've evolved. There are tools that change the way we produce things and deliver things, but bottom line, yeah, humans will still be here for a little while, I hope.
Exactly.
Now, getting back to the different type of skills based or modular learning that you are trying to set up, not just at the Tech, as you said, but through other universities, is that very much linked to the labor markets that are demanding some of these new capacities for the students to have adopted at the university?
Very much so. I think some of the pressures we're seeing in the recent times is that the skills needs of the industry is changing rapidly. And traditionally, the way that we've designed degrees and four-year college education, it's not sufficiently agile to keep pace with these changes. And these changes are happening at scale across multiple industries and at speed, which creates the problem of skills becoming obsolete very quickly. In artificial intelligence is a good example. Every company in every industry is now thinking, what do I do with my employees? How do we have the right skills for the changing nature of the jobs? Where do we go to acquire those skills? And that's the big question. And traditional education systems are not able to provide for this rapid change at scale. So my take is that we need to incorporate more flexible and modular learning pathways using a range of micro-credentials, but also stackable micro-credentials. So you're creating learning pathways that would allow individuals to continue to learn throughout their professional careers and to work themselves towards higher degrees or higher levels of certification. It may not all be necessary to peg these to qualifications, but in some cases, yes. But in other cases, it's more about acquiring the necessary skills and certification for particular job roles and job tasks. What I believe universities need to do is to move towards a competency and skills-based education model that allows for more rapid updates to the curriculum as the competencies and skills needs changes. The other thing that I believe universities need to address is to improve the level of engagement with industry so that they're able to sense what are the changing needs that the industry has and be able to use that as feedback in redesigning some of the curriculum and the courses. And as we mentioned earlier, regulatory barriers and issues do come to the fore as we are looking at more flexible models. And so universities have to work with policymakers, regulators, to address these barriers and issues. In some cases, it's working around the existing regulation, but in some cases is having the conversations for policymakers to change the regulations to enable some of these work to be done. As I reflect about the work that I did in Singapore previously, we were able to manage to transform the universities to adopt a much more agile and lifelong learning model. The universities across Singapore, including the National University, the Nanyang Technological University, set up colleges for lifelong education. So these are dedicated colleges that focuses on lifelong education, drawing on their core academic strengths, but setting up new capabilities to serve learners that come from non-traditional backgrounds, not your traditional 18 to 22-year-old students, but for learners that are coming back from the industry, learners that might be older with different experiences, and finding a way to harmonize these operations across the formal education pathways that they still provide with the non-formal education offerings that is much more responsive and tailored to the needs of industry and the workforce. I believe that lifelong learning, lifelong education is starting to become more and more a part of the core mission of universities here in Mexico, and beyond. In Singapore, in other parts of the world, it's becoming a core mission of universities. And we are, at my institute, we are working to define how these models of the future-ready universities will look like to help to chart the path forward for universities in different countries and work alongside them to help them to evolve and to maintain their relevance to the needs of their societies, to capture and recapture the value and prominence of our universities within our societies.
I love that idea, Michael. I would love to go back to the university, to be honest, as a student, not as a teacher, which is what I do now, to keep on learning. I think there is a always great need to reinvent yourself and to adopt new capabilities as you grow older in your job. And there is always no limit on how much you can always learn, I guess. Finally, my last question is, after you worked across very different education systems worldwide, where do you see the best opportunities for Mexico to deepen global collaboration in education and innovation, if I may say so?
Well, as I think about Mexico, I think Mexico has a number of natural advantages. First is the size of the population in Mexico. With more than 130 million population size, it is a sizable economy in the region, but also in the world. And as I think about the demographics of Mexico, there's still a relatively youthful population, which means that there is a large talent pool that can be developed to power economic growth and societal growth. Mexico, in my view, has relatively good infrastructure and relatively good talent systems. As I think about benchmarking Mexico across the world, of course there are areas to improve on, but relatively good overall. And one geographic advantage, one natural advantage is the geography of Mexico, being at the doorstep, the proximity to one of the most sophisticated and largest markets in the world, in the U.S. I think that's a natural advantage that Mexico has, despite of the recent geopolitical tensions that might be in place. It's still a lasting geographic advantage that I think Mexico has. So access to a large market, domestic market, access to a large market across Latin America with 600 million people, access to the U.S. market with 300 million people, and a promising potential youthful talent pool, leveraging on the infrastructure and talent systems that Mexico has. So those are the natural advantages. And I think where Mexico's opportunities lie is to take these natural advantages and develop them into competitive strengths that other countries find it hard to replicate. So I think Mexico has the opportunity to develop itself to be a hub for talent, for students, for learners, for workforce talents that are taking advantage of these natural advantages of the country to develop themselves, and to develop the companies and the careers. I think Mexico also has the opportunity to position itself as an innovation hub that encourages experiments, that encourages innovation and startups to address various issues facing the country, the region, and the global south. And this is where I think Mexico can really play an outsized role. And in the process of building up its position as a talent hub, an innovation hub, to become a hub for investments by industry, by leading companies around the world, by capital flows, because that's, industry and capital flows go to where talent is, goes to where innovation is, where market opportunities are. So as I think about how, Singapore, which is where I was originally from, how Singapore had developed over the past few decades by combining strategies to develop talent, innovation, infrastructure, bringing investments, and so on. I think it is very possible with alignment of policies and investments in the economic area, in the labor markets, in the education domains. It is very possible to make this happen if the policies and initiatives are well aligned, and to adopt a international mindset with global collaborations that will help to spark innovation in education and other areas, to help power Mexico's development as a knowledge-based economy, for our industries to move up the value chain, for our talents to develop into in supporting a vibrant economy and society for all segments of the population. I think that's where my aspiration and my hope is for Mexico and for the region to develop into that future.
Michael, you're at the right place at the right time with the institute that you lead. So thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. Education is a key part for any economy, for any country that wants to move forward. So very interesting what you just told us. And thank you again for taking the time to talk to Mex Moves.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. It was a real pleasure, and I hope to see you again soon.
We will.
So thank you for joining Mex Moves. Look forward to next week's episode. And please leave your comments on the platforms and subscribe.
Happy New Year to everybody.